He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Chapter 3. Shopping. An hour later, Fat Rabbit found himself in the cellar that stretched out darkly and dankly underneath the kitchen of the farmhouse. His mood had not improved in the slightest, despite the fact that the rain had finally stopped. The usual stream of animals popping in and out of the kitchen to share a coffee, catch up on the crack, or take Fat Rabbit on in a game of Jenga had not happened at all, and it was obvious to him that he had somehow become persona non grata on his own farm. Quite how he was going to resolve the situation was not immediately clear to him, so he decided that a bottle of Fitou would probably help in his efforts to envisage a cunning solution. Fat Rabbit's cellar was, like many cellars often are, a complete tip. Like the dragons of yore, Fat Rabbit was a bit of a hoarder and had a collection of bicycles with one wheel, old skis, broken tennis rackets, assorted types of chimney pot, mangles, parachutes, outdoor motors, and countless other odds and sods. The only space in the entire room was nearest the stairs where the wine rack was, and it was this that Fat Rabbit was looking at with some consternation. It was empty. You might imagine that a rabbit with such a Fitou habit would keep a very well-stocked wine rack. Indeed, this had been Fat Rabbit's intention many years previously when he first acquired the ancient wooden rack, and was full of plans to lay down fine wines to mature over many years and to be quaffed only on very special occasions. But these things never happen as we plan, especially when friends drop round, or it's too rainy or too late to walk to Heinit's to buy another bottle when there's wine in the cellar. Fat Rabbit slapped his forehead. Bugger! He had meant to go to Heinit's yesterday and stock up, but in the general excitement and trauma of the day, it had totally slipped his mind. Not to worry, he thought as he headed back up the stairs. I'll just pop to Heinit's now and get some more Marleys whilst I'm at it. Heinit's everything shop sat just at the other side of Tumbling Bridge from Fat Rabbit's farm. For centuries it had been a toll house that taxed anyone pottering down Fivefolds Lane who wished to use the bridge to cross Tumbling Stream. More recently, and for as long as anyone on Fat Rabbit's farm could remember, the old house had been owned and run by Mr. Heinit as his everything shop. A more aptly named shop you could not find, even if you walked all the way down Fivefolds Lane and far, far over the horizon. Heinit's everything shop sold all manner of things you could think of, and many things that had never occurred to you that you could buy. In fact, no one at the farm, not even Lightning the Owl, who was definitely the oldest and possibly the wisest animal in Dodgy Tenor Wood, could think of a single occasion when they had gone to Heinit's and not been able to acquire whatsoever it was they needed. Quite how everything fitted in the everything shop was a total mystery. Lightning maintained that there were huge cavernous storerooms underneath the shop that dated back to the Great Valley Siege of centuries ago. Fat Rabbit was of the opinion that it was connected to a much larger shop in a parallel universe. Flues had long ago settled on the much simpler notion that it was all done by magic. Sparking his final cigarette, Fat Rabbit bounded out of the farmhouse and crossed the rather muddy and puddled courtyard to the gate that was still rather annoyingly shut. Deciding that he would open it on his way back, he hopped over the honeysuckled bars into Fivefolds Lane, and was just about to head towards the bridge when, to his great surprise and consternation, he found himself being lifted off the ground by his ears. "Ouch! Get off me ears, you bugger!" he cried as he continued to rise until he found himself once more staring into the rather narrow and unpleasant eyes of the chief alien of the day before. "And where do we think we're off to, young bunny me lad?" he asked in a most patronising manner. "Well, I don't know where you're going, but I'm going to the shop," answered Fat Rabbit crossly. "Now can you let go of the ears?" "You're going nowhere, Sonny Jim," You and all your furry little pals are quarantined, remember? Futtermuth must be stopped, eradicated, and exterminated." Before he could even open his mouth in reply, Fat Rabbit found himself somersaulting over and over through the air as he was unceremoniously thrown back over the gate like a bag of rubbish into a skip. He landed somewhat heavily on his bum, right in the middle of a large, muddy puddle that soaked his fur with rainwater and extinguished his final cigarette that had rather incredulously, and somewhat coolly as he later thought, remained in his mouth throughout his brief aerobatics. "And stay there!" shouted the man over the gate. Fat Rabbit sat in the puddle and fumed. He was so angry he'd lost all use of his tongue and couldn't even force a bugger out of his lips. Having your own gate forced shut by the massed minions of an authoritarian state was one thing. Being hurled through the air by your ears was quite another. However, Fat Rabbit was not the sort of Lappin to allow the small matter of a state quarantine order come between him and a bottle of Fitou. This rabbit was made of sterner stuff than he appeared. Picking himself up and wringing out his ears, he stuck his cigarette firmly between his teeth and strode off with an air of grim determination towards Archibald's stable at the other side of the courtyard. "There's more than one way into Mordor," he thought to himself, "and there's more than one way out of this farmyard. I'll show the buggers." Skirting past the stable, Fat Rabbit made his way towards the far corner of the farmyard. There, hidden away amongst the nettles, meadowsweet and hogweed, was a small and much weathered wooden gate that hung on one hinge like a drunk leaning on his best mate. Many years ago this had been the main pedestrian access to the farm, but as Fat Rabbit usually left the main gate open, it had fallen into disuse and been forgotten about like an old Sony Walkman. For a moment Fat Rabbit paused and contemplated the massive phalanx of stinging nettles. Many years ago his grandmother had told him an old country rhyme about nettles. "When you go to touch a nettle, grasp it like a man of metal." Fat Rabbit, being an inquisitive sort of rabbit, had gone out and put this quaint morsel of country lore to the test. You might wish to try it out for yourself, and so we'll quietly pass over the results of Fat Rabbit's experiment in case we spoil your surprise. There was, however, nothing else for it. Head down and feet splayed widely to push aside the leaning stingers at their base, Fat Rabbit pushed boldly forward, with many an ouch and the occasional bugger. In a few, if rather painful moments, he reached the gate and looked out onto Five Folds Lane. Looking left, right, and back to the left, there was nothing to be seen. A few yards away was Tumbling Bridge, and immediately beyond it the familiar and comforting sight of Hynet's everything shop. With a leap of triumph, Fat Rabbit cleared the gate and the rest of the nettles and landed firmly in the middle of Five Folds Lane. "That'll show the buggers," he thought to himself with pride. "It'll take more than is the noise you make when you're happily strolling down a rural lane when suddenly, from out of nowhere, a shepherd's crook hooks itself deftly around your throat, grabs you and rises you up into the clear, fresh country air. "Nice work, Corporal Clot! Now hold him there, lad!" shouted a cold and nasty voice that Fat Rabbit now recognised as belonging to the leader of the white-clad culling squad. "One Insurgent Rabbit being held here, Herr Oberst, sir!" confirmed the corporal as Fat Rabbit dangled a few feet from the ground, desperately trying to breathe at the end of the crook. The Oberst strode over to Fat Rabbit and narrowed his eyes, and gave him a look that was nastier than a bad cut between the toes from a rusty bit of barbed wire. "Now, Rabbit, let me be very clear. You and your furry chums are under quarantine and martial law. That means, little bunny, that you cannot and do not leave the farm until we have culled the pox-ridden, diseased ungulates and eradicated all strains of futtermuth from this green and pleasant land." Was all that Fat Rabbit could say. The Oberst then leaned even closer to the dangling rabbit, and taking one of his ears, whispered into it in his most menacing tone. "Remember this, Mr. Fat Rabbit. Whilst you might not have any hooves, these sort of complex culling operations inevitably lead to the occasional mistake, the odd bit of what we like to call collateral damage. It would be a dreadful shame if the corporal here became a little confused during his work and accidentally curtailed a bunny bystander. I am sure you get my drift." Turning to the corporal, the oberst ordered, "Send him on his way, Clot!" And with that, Fat Rabbit once more found himself somersaulting through the air towards the farmyard. With an almighty splash, and with the precision that the military loved to pride themselves on, Fat Rabbit landed in the same muddy puddle. A moment later, his last half-smoked cigarette landed with a pathetic little fizz and sizzle in the water next to him. Bagger!
He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Nailed it, you bugger.